Welcome to Mythical Serenity, a gentle sanctuary where ancient myths, soft legends, and dreamlike tales drift quietly into the night. Our first story is the Odyssey of Odysseus. Close your eyes now and let yourself drift back through the mists of time to an age of heroes and gods, of vast seas and distant shores, of a journey that will become the greatest story ever told of one man's determination to find his way home. Our tale begins not at the beginning, but at the end of another story, the Great War at Troy, which had raged for 10 long years. The massive walls of that ancient city had finally fallen, brought down by cunning rather than strength, by a wooden horse that held warriors in its belly. The war was over, and the Greek heroes prepared to sail home to their families, their kingdoms, their lives that had been waiting for them across the wine-dark sea. Among these warriors was Odysseus, king of Ithaca, a small rocky island in the western sea. Odysseus was not the strongest of the Greek heroes. That honor belonged to mighty Achilles, nor was he the most powerful. That was Agamemnon, who commanded all the Greek forces. But Odysseus possessed something perhaps more valuable, a brilliant mind and a silver tongue. It was he who had conceived of the wooden horse. It was he who had solved problems that no amount of strength could overcome. Now, as he stood on the shore looking at his ships, Odysseus' heart swelled with joy. Soon, perhaps in a few weeks, he would see his home again. He would embrace his wife Penelope, whom he had not seen in 10 years. He would meet his son Telemachus, who had been only a baby when Odysseus left for war, and who would now be a young man of 20. He would walk again through his own halls, sleep in his own bed, rule his own kingdom. He could not have known, as his ships raised their sails and pulled away from the conquered city, that his journey home would take not weeks, but 10 more years. 10 years of wandering, of trials, of encounters with monsters and gods, and wonders both terrible and beautiful. 10 years that would test him in ways that even the Great War had not. But let us not rush ahead. Let us travel with Odysseus, wave by wave, island by island, and live through his adventures as he lived through them, not knowing what would come next, holding only the hope and the image of home. The Cyclones and the Lotus Eaters. The first days of the voyage went well. The ships made good progress, and Odysseus' men were in high spirits, singing songs of victory and home. But Odysseus, ever cautious, knew that the sea was unpredictable and the gods capricious. Their first landing was at the land of the Cyclones. It should have been a brief stop for supplies and water, nothing more. But some of Odysseus' men, emboldened by their victory at Troy and hungry for more spoils, insisted on raiding the city. Against Odysseus' better judgment, they attacked, and though they won the initial skirmish, the Cyclones called for reinforcements from inland. In the battle that followed, Odysseus lost 6 men from each of his 12 ships, 72 men in total, the first of many losses that would haunt his journey home. They fled back to their ships and sailed away with heavy hearts. A storm caught them then, sent perhaps by Zeus himself as punishment for their greed. For 9 days they were blown off course, the wind and waves tossing their ships like toys, until finally they reached an island of strange, gentle people called the Lotus Eaters. These inhabitants welcomed the weary Greeks kindly and offered them food, the lotus flower, which grew abundantly on their island. It seemed a harmless gift, and the men who tasted it found it delicious, sweet beyond any fruit they had known. But the lotus held a secret. All who ate it forgot their homes, their families, their very purpose. They wanted only to remain on that peaceful island forever, eating lotus flowers and drifting in pleasant forgetfulness. Odysseus himself did not eat the lotus, and when he found his men sprawled contentedly on the beach, smiling but vacant, refusing to return to the ships, his heart filled with dread, he realized what had happened. By force, he dragged the affected men back to the ships, even as they wept and begged to stay. He tied them to the rowing benches until the flower's effects wore off and ordered the ships to depart immediately before any more men could be tempted. As they sailed away, Odysseus reflected on this strange danger. Not a monster or an enemy, but simple forgetfulness, the temptation to let go of struggle and duty and simply exist in pleasant numbness. It was perhaps the first hint that his journey would test not just his body, but his will and his very identity. The cave of the Cyclops. Their next landing would prove far more dangerous. They came to an island that seemed uninhabited, rich with wild goats and fresh water. While most of his fleet remained at this safe island, Odysseus took his own ship and a crew of 12 men to explore a larger island nearby. Smoke rose from caves in the hills, suggesting inhabitants, and Odysseus' curiosity was aroused. They found a large cave that appeared to be a shepherd's dwelling. It was enormous, far larger than any human would need, with pens for sheep and goats, and wheels of cheese as big as wagon wheels. Odysseus' men urged him to take some supplies and leave quickly, but Odysseus insisted on waiting to meet the inhabitant, hoping for a gift of hospitality, as was the custom. As evening fell, they heard the sound of heavy footsteps, and into the cave came the shepherd, but he was no man. He was a Cyclops, a giant with a single enormous eye in the center of his forehead. His name, they would learn, was Polyphemus, and he stood as tall as a tree, with hands that could crush boulders. Polyphemus drove his flocks into the cave and sealed the entrance with a massive stone that 20 teams of oxen could not have moved. Only then did he notice the men cowering in the shadows of his cave. His single eye fixed upon them, and when he spoke, his voice was like grinding rocks. "Who are you, and why have you entered my home?" Odysseus stepped forward bravely and explained that they were Greeks returning from the war at Troy, and asked for hospitality in the name of Zeus, who protected travelers and guests. But Polyphemus only laughed, a terrible sound that echoed in the cave. "I care nothing for Zeus or any god," he said. "We Cyclopes answer to no one." And with that, he reached out, grabbed two of Odysseus' men, and dashed them against the cave floor like puppets. He ate them then, bones and all, as the others watched in horror. After this terrible meal, Polyphemus lay down and slept, his snores rattling the cave walls. Odysseus' first instinct was to drive his sword into the monster's heart, but wisdom stayed his hand. If they killed Polyphemus, they would be trapped forever, unable to move the massive stone that blocked the cave entrance. Through that long night, as his men wept for their lost companions, Odysseus thought, and by dawn, when Polyphemus awoke and ate 2 more men for his breakfast before taking his flocks out to pasture, Odysseus had formed a plan. In the cave, he found a massive olive wood staff that Polyphemus used as a walking stick. It was as thick as a ship's mast. Odysseus and his remaining men worked all day, cutting off a section and sharpening it to a point, hardening the point in the fire until it was as hard as stone. Then they hid it under the dung and debris on the cave floor. When Polyphemus returned that evening, he again seized 2 men for his dinner. After he had eaten, Odysseus approached him carrying a bowl. "Cyclops," he said, keeping his voice steady, "you have eaten my men, but at least honor them by washing down your meal with this wine, a gift from my ship." It was strong wine, undiluted, meant to be mixed with water before drinking. Polyphemus drank deeply and smiled, a horrible sight. "More," he demanded, and Odysseus obliged. The giant drank bowl after bowl. Finally, his words beginning to slur, Polyphemus asked, "What is your name, little man? I will give you a gift in return for this excellent wine." "My name is Nobody," Odysseus replied. "My friends call me Nobody." "Then Nobody," Polyphemus laughed drunkenly, "my gift to you is this: I will eat you last after all your friends." And with that, he collapsed into a stupor, wine and blood dribbling from his mouth. Immediately, Odysseus and his men retrieved the sharpened stake and thrust it into the fire until the point glowed red hot. Then together, they lifted the massive beam, ran forward, and drove it into the Cyclops' single eye. Polyphemus' scream was like the roar of a volcano. He pulled the stake from his eye and staggered around the cave, blind and bellowing in agony. His screams brought other Cyclopes to the mouth of the cave. "What troubles you, Polyphemus?" they called. "Who is hurting you?" "Nobody." Polyphemus screamed, "Nobody is hurting me. Nobody has blinded me." "If nobody is hurting you," the other Cyclopes replied, confused, "then you must be ill. Pray to your father Poseidon for help." And they wandered away, leaving Polyphemus alone in his torment. The next morning, though blind, Polyphemus still sat by the cave entrance, rolling away the stone to let his flocks out to pasture, but running his hands over each animal to ensure no men escaped. But Odysseus had one more trick. He tied his remaining men beneath the largest rams, 3 goats to each man, with himself clinging to the belly of the largest ram of all. As each ram passed, Polyphemus felt its back, but never thought to check underneath. The great ram that carried Odysseus paused, and Polyphemus stroked his fleece, saying, "Why do you linger, my favorite? Usually you are first in pasture. Perhaps you grieve for your master's eye, taken by Nobody and his wicked men." But he let the ram pass, and Odysseus escaped. Once outside, they released themselves and drove the flock to their ship. But as they pushed off from shore, Odysseus, perhaps proud of his cleverness, perhaps angry at the deaths of his men, made a terrible mistake. He shouted back to shore, "Cyclops, if anyone asks who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus of Ithaca, son of Laertes, sacker of cities. He should have remained Nobody." Polyphemus, hearing this, reached down and tore off the top of a mountain, hurling it at the voice. The massive rock fell just short of the ship, but the wave it created nearly drove them back to shore. Odysseus's men begged him to be silent, but the damage was done. Polyphemus raised his arms to the sky and prayed, "Father Poseidon, god of the sea, hear me. Let this Odysseus never reach his home. Or if the fates decree he must, let him arrive late broken, having lost all his companions, and let him find trouble in his house." Poseidon heard his son's prayer, and from that moment, the god of the sea became Odysseus's enemy, ensuring that his voyage home would be long and filled with suffering. The island of Aeolus. Still, the voyage continued. They came next to the floating island of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. This was a strange and beautiful place, where the island itself drifted on the sea, surrounded by bronze walls and eternal feasting. Aeolus welcomed them warmly and listened with fascination to tales of the Trojan War. For a full month, Odysseus and his men rested there, well-fed and honored. When at last it was time to depart, Aeolus gave Odysseus a remarkable gift, an ox-hide bag containing all the winds of the world except the gentle west wind, which would blow them directly home to Ithaca. "Keep this bag sealed," Aeolus warned, "and you will reach your home in 10 days. But do not let anyone open it before then." With hope renewed, the ship set sail. The west wind filled their sails perfectly, and for 9 days they made excellent progress. Odysseus was so anxious that the bag remained sealed that he refused to sleep, standing constant watch over it. By the 9th day, Ithaca itself came into view on the horizon. They could see smoke rising from the fires of home. But exhaustion finally overcame Odysseus, and he fell into a deep sleep. His men, who had been curious about the bag all along, saw their chance. They had convinced themselves it must contain gold and silver, gifts from Aeolus that Odysseus planned to keep for himself. "It's not fair," one muttered. "We've suffered alongside him, lost friends, faced monsters. Why should he get all the treasure?" "Let's just take a quick look," another suggested. "We'll take our fair share and seal it again before he wakes." The moment they untied the bag, all the winds that had been bound inside burst out in a tremendous gale. The ships were seized by howling storms and blown backward, all the way back to Aeolus's island in a matter of hours. When Odysseus awoke and realized what had happened, when he saw Ithaca vanishing in the distance behind them, his heart broke. They had been so close with inside home, and now it was lost again. They returned to Aeolus's floating island, and Odysseus begged for help once more. But Aeolus looked at him with pity and shook his head. "You must be cursed by the gods," he said. "I dare not help you again. Leave my island. You are clearly not meant to go home." And he sent them away. This was perhaps the cruelest moment yet, to have been so close, to have actually seen home, only to have it snatched away by the foolishness of his own men. Odysseus's heart was heavy as they set sail once more, no longer certain of their direction, no longer certain of anything. The Laestrygonians. For 6 days they rowed, for the winds would no longer favor them. They came to what seemed like a protected harbor, with high cliffs on either side. 11 of the 12 ships sailed into this harbor, but Odysseus, ever cautious, anchored his own ship outside at the mouth of the bay. This caution saved his life and the lives of his crew, for the harbor was the home of the Laestrygonians, a race of giant cannibals. They swarmed the cliffs above the trapped ships and hurled massive boulders down, smashing the vessels like eggs and spearing the men in the water like fish. From his position at the harbor's mouth, Odysseus could only watch in horror as 11 of his 12 ships, hundreds of his men, were destroyed in moments. With his one remaining ship, he cut the anchor line and ordered his men to row for their lives. They escaped, but Odysseus had now lost all but one ship and 45 men from a fleet of 12 ships and over 600 men he had started with. Circe's island. Heartbroken and weary, they came next to the island of Aea, home of the witch goddess Circe. They anchored their ship and collapsed on the beach, too exhausted and despairing to even explore. For 2 days they simply rested. On the 3rd day, Odysseus climbed a hill to survey the island and saw smoke rising from the interior, signs of habitation. He divided his men into 2 groups. One, led by his trusted second-in-command Eurylochus, would explore. The other would stay with the ship. Eurylochus and his men found a beautiful palace in a clearing, surrounded by wolves and lions that seemed strangely tame, approaching the men and rubbing against them like house cats. Inside the palace, they heard a woman singing in a lovely voice. When they called out, she appeared, Circe herself, beautiful and gracious, inviting them inside for a feast. All the men entered except Eurylochus, who felt some instinctive warning. He remained hidden outside and watched through a window as Circe gave the men food and wine. But the wine was drugged, and as soon as they had drunk it, Circe struck them with her wand and transformed them all into pigs. She drove them into pens and gave them acorns to eat. Eurylochus ran back to the ship to report what he had seen. Odysseus immediately took up his sword and set out to rescue his men, despite Eurylochus' warnings. On the path to Circe's palace, he was met by a young man in a traveler's cloak who called out to him, "Odysseus!" The stranger said, and Odysseus recognized him. "Hermes, the messenger god." "You go to face Circe," Hermes said, "but you will fall victim to her magic as your men did, unless you take this protection." He held out a plant with a black root and white flower. "This is moly, which grows only in the gardens of the gods. Eat this before you drink her wine, and you will be immune to her magic. When she strikes at you with her wand, draw your sword and rush at her as if to kill her. She will be frightened and will offer you her bed. But first make her swear by the river Styx that she will do you no harm and will release your men." Odysseus did exactly as Hermes instructed. When Circe gave him drugged wine, it had no effect. When she struck it with her wand, he drew his sword. She fell to her knees in amazement and fear. "Who are you?" she gasped. "No man has ever resisted my magic. You must be Odysseus. Hermes told me you would come one day." After she swore her oath, Circe transformed Odysseus's men back to human form, looking even younger and more handsome than before. She welcomed them all to her palace, promising hospitality without tricks. She treated them to feasts and comforts they had not known since leaving Troy. Days turned to weeks, and weeks to months. Circe's island was beautiful, her hospitality generous, and after so much suffering, the men were content to rest. But one day, after they had been there nearly a year, Odysseus's men came to him. "We have not forgotten Ithaca," they said gently. "If you truly want to go home, we should leave." Odysseus realized they were right. He had almost forgotten himself, lulled by comfort and Circe's enchantments. He asked Circe to release them and help them on their journey. "I will," she said, "but first you must make one more journey. Before you can go home, you must travel to the underworld, to the land of the dead, and consult the spirit of the prophet Tiresias. Only he can tell you how to reach Ithaca safely." The blood drained from Odysseus's face. The underworld? But no living man has ever gone there and returned. "You will be the first," Circe said, and she told him how to find the entrance at the edge of the world, where the river of ocean flows around the earth, and what rituals he must perform to summon the dead. The journey to the underworld. With heavy hearts, Odysseus and his men sailed north to the edge of the world, where the sun never shines and eternal mist hangs over the land. They found the entrance to the underworld as Circe had described and performed the ritual. Digging a trench, pouring libations of honey, wine, and water, and sacrificing a ram and a ewe, the blood flowed into the trench, and from the depths of the earth, the spirits of the dead came swarming up, hungry for blood that would give them temporary strength and voice. Odysseus had to hold them back with his sword, allowing only certain spirits to approach. First came Elpenor, one of his own men who had died on Circe's island, drunkenly falling from a roof. He begged Odysseus to return and give him proper burial rites. Odysseus promised he would. Then came Tiresias, the blind prophet, who drank the blood and gained the power to speak clearly. "Odysseus," he said, his hollow voice echoing, "difficult is your path home. Poseidon is angry, but if you and your men show discipline, you may yet reach Ithaca. Soon you will come to the island where the sun god's cattle graze. Do not touch these cattle. No matter how hungry you are, if you harm them, your ship will be destroyed and all your men will die. Only you might survive, and you will reach home late in a stranger's ship to find your house full of troubles." After Tiresias departed, other spirits came forward. Odysseus saw his mother, Anaclea, and wept. He had not known she had died while he was at war. She told him that she had died of grief, waiting for him to return. She told him that his wife Penelope remained faithful, but that his house was besieged by suitors who sought to marry her and take his throne, assuming he was dead. His son Telemachus was trying to hold him off, but he was young and they were many. This news filled Odysseus with new urgency. He tried to embrace his mother's spirit, but his arms passed through her like smoke. 3 times he tried, and 3 times she faded from his grasp. He saw other spirits too, great heroes from the Trojan War, including mighty Achilles. When Odysseus praised Achilles for his glory, the hero's shade replied bitterly, "Better to be a slave among the living than a king among the dead." Even glorious death, it seemed, was worse than humble life. Finally, as more and more spirits pressed forward, Odysseus became frightened that the dread goddess Persephone might send up some monster from deeper in the underworld. He and his men returned to their ship and sailed away from that dark shore, carrying with them the knowledge of what must come. The Sirens in between Scylla and Charybdis. They returned to Circe's island just long enough to give Elpenor proper burial. Then Circe prepared them for the next stage of their journey, warning them of the dangers ahead. First, she said, you will pass the island of the Sirens. They sit on their rocks and sing in voices so beautiful that any man who hears them is compelled to swim to them. But the shore around their island is white with the bones of those who answered their call. You must plug your men's ears with beeswax. If you wish to hear their song yourself, have your men tie you to the mast and make them swear not to release you, no matter how you beg. When they reached the Sirens' island, Odysseus did exactly this. His men filled their ears with wax while they bound him tightly to the mast. As they rowed past the island, Odysseus heard the siren song, a sound more beautiful than anything he had imagined, promising knowledge and wisdom and rest. He screamed and begged his men to free him, but they only tied him tighter, and eventually they passed beyond the range of that enchanting song. Next came the narrow strait that Circe had warned them about. On one side was Scylla, a monster with 6 heads on long necks, each head filled with rows of sharp teeth. She lived in a cave high on the cliff face and would snatch sailors from any ship that passed too close. On the other side was Charybdis, a massive whirlpool that sucked down entire ships 3 times a day. You cannot avoid both, Circe had said. Sail closer to Scylla. Better to lose 6 men than your entire ship. It was a horrible choice, but Odysseus made it. He ordered his men to row hard, staying as far from Charybdis as they could. As they passed below Scylla's cave, the monster struck with terrible speed. 6 of his best men were seized, 1 in each of Scylla's mouths. Odysseus could hear them calling his name as they were lifted up toward the cave, reaching their hands toward him. But there was nothing he could do. He had to sail on, and their voices faded behind him. It was perhaps the worst moment of his entire journey, to deliberately sacrifice some of his men to save the rest. The guilt would haunt him forever. 7 years with Calypso. Calypso was beautiful and kind. She nursed Odysseus back to health and welcomed him to her island paradise. She offered him immortality if he would stay with her forever and be her husband. For a while, perhaps Odysseus considered it. He was tired of suffering, tired of struggling. What was left for him? His ship was destroyed, his men all dead. By now, surely Penelope would have given him up for dead and remarried. Perhaps it would be easier to simply accept this new life, to let go of the past and the future both, and exist in this timeless place. But as months turned to years, 7 years in total, Odysseus found himself sitting on the shore every day, staring out at the empty horizon, tears running down his face. Calypso could give him everything except the one thing he wanted: home. Finally, the gods themselves intervened. Athena, goddess of wisdom, had always favored Odysseus. She pleaded with Zeus to free him. Zeus sent Hermes to command Calypso to release her captive. Though heartbroken, Calypso obeyed. She helped Odysseus build a raft and provisioned it for his journey. "I could make you immortal," she said sadly. "I could keep you forever young and free from pain. And still you choose to go back to a mortal woman who will age and die." "Yes," Odysseus replied simply, "because she is my home." The storm and the Phaeacians. Odysseus set sail on his raft, and for 17 days all went well. But Poseidon, returning from a journey to distant lands, spotted him. The god's anger had not diminished. He raised a terrible storm that shattered the raft to pieces. Odysseus was certain he would drown at last. But a sea nymph named Ino took pity on him and gave him her veil. "Wrap this around your chest," she said, "and swim. When you reach land, throw it back into the sea." For 2 days and nights, Odysseus swam through the raging sea. Finally, he reached the shore of an unknown land, Scheria, home of the Phaeacians. He crawled onto the beach, returned the veil to the sea as instructed, and collapsed in exhaustion under a pile of leaves. The next morning, he was awakened by the sound of laughter. A group of young women were playing ball on the beach, led by the princess Nausicaa. When the ball went astray and landed near Odysseus, and he emerged from the bushes, naked, crusted with salt, looking more like a wild beast than a man, all the girls fled except Nausicaa herself. She saw past his appearance to the nobility in his bearing and speech. She gave him clothing and told him to follow her group at a distance to the palace of her father, King Alcinous. There, she said, he would find the hospitality he needed. That evening, Odysseus was welcomed to the palace, though he did not yet reveal his identity. The Phaeacians were a wealthy and peaceful people, blessed by the gods, and they treated strangers with great kindness. At the feast, a blind bard named Demodocus sang songs of the Trojan War, including stories of Odysseus' own exploits. As he listened to his own life being turned into song, Odysseus wept, covering his face. King Alcinous noticed and asked the bard to change songs. Later, speaking privately with Odysseus, the king said gently, "You weep when you hear Troy. Did you lose someone there? A friend? A relative? Or perhaps you were there yourself?" At last, Odysseus revealed who he was, and through that entire night, he told his whole story, everything that had happened since he left Troy 10 years before. The Phaeacians listened in amazement and pity. When dawn came, Alcinous promised, "We will take you home. Our ships are the fastest on the sea, blessed by Poseidon himself. In a single day, we will bring you to Ithaca. Home at last, true to their word, the Phaeacians prepared their finest ship. They loaded it with gifts, bronze, gold, fine cloth, more wealth than Odysseus had lost with his own ships. They gave him a bed in the stern, and as soon as he laid down, exhausted from his night of storytelling, he fell into the deepest sleep he had known in years. The ship sailed so smoothly that Odysseus did not wake even as they arrived at Ithaca the next morning. The Phaeacians gently carried him, still sleeping, to a beach on his home island and laid him beneath an olive tree, placing all the gifts beside him. Then they sailed away, their good deed done. When Odysseus finally woke, he did not recognize where he was. Mist obscured the familiar landscape, and his mind could not accept that after 20 years, he was truly home. He thought the Phaeacians had tricked him and left him on some foreign shore. But then Athena appeared to him, disguised first as a young shepherd, then revealing her true form. "You are home," she assured him. "This is Ithaca, but you must be careful. Your house is full of suitors, more than 100 men who seek to marry Penelope and take your throne. They have been consuming your wealth for years, slaughtering your livestock, drinking your wine, and pressing your wife to choose one of them. Penelope has held them off with tricks and delays, but she cannot do so much longer, and your son Telemachus is in danger. Some of the suitors plan to kill him." Athena transformed Odysseus' appearance, making him look like an old beggar, and together they planned his revenge. He would go first to the hut of Eumaeus, his loyal swineherd, and learn more about the situation. Meanwhile, Athena would bring Telemachus home from his own journey. The young man had gone searching for news of his father. The return of the king. Everything happened as Athena planned. Odysseus, disguised as a beggar, was welcomed by Eumaeus, who did not recognize his master, but showed him kindness. Soon Telemachus arrived, and in private, Athena restored Odysseus' true appearance. Father and son were reunited at last, embracing and weeping. Telemachus had been an infant when Odysseus left. Now he was a man, and Odysseus had missed watching him grow. Together, they planned how to deal with the suitors. Odysseus would return to his own house, still disguised as a beggar, to see the situation for himself. When the time was right, they would strike. The next day, Odysseus entered his own great hall and found it full of arrogant young men, eating his food, drinking his wine, courting his wife. They mocked the old beggar, some even throwing food at him. But Penelope, hearing of the stranger, asked to speak with him. Perhaps, she thought, he had news of her husband. Odysseus sat before his wife, the woman he had thought of every day for 20 years. And she did not know him. He told her a false story of being a Cretan who had once hosted Odysseus. And Penelope wept to hear even invented news of her husband. Then Penelope made an announcement to the suitors. She would hold a contest. Odysseus had once owned a great bow that no one but he could string. She would marry whoever could string that bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe handles set in a row. The next day, the contest began. One by one, the strongest suitors tried to string the bow. One by one, they failed. The bow was too stiff, too strong. None of them could even bend enough to attach the string. The old beggar, Odysseus, asked to try. The suitors laughed and mocked him, but Penelope gave permission. Odysseus took the bow, and as easily as a musician strings his lyre, he strung it. Then he notched an arrow and sent it cleanly through all 12 axe handles. The suitors' laughter died. Before they could react, Odysseus threw off his rags, revealing himself at last. With Telemachus and his few loyal servants, he turned his arrows on the suitors. There was a great battle in the hall, but Odysseus, after all his trials, was not to be defeated in his own home. By the end, all the suitors lay dead. Peace at last. Even then, Penelope was not certain. Could this really be her husband after 20 years? She tested him, mentioning casually that she would have the servants move their marriage bed to another room. Odysseus reacted with sudden anger. "That bed cannot be moved," he exclaimed. "I built it myself. Built it around a living olive tree that grew in the center of our bedroom. One post of that bed is a living tree rooted in the earth. No one could move it without cutting through the tree itself." Only Odysseus could have known this secret. Penelope's doubts vanished, and she ran to him. At last, after 20 years of separation, husband and wife were reunited. They held each other and wept and talked through the entire night, sharing all that had happened in their years apart. Athena, watching over them, held back the dawn, making that night of reunion last longer, giving them more time together before the world came rushing back with its demands and its troubles. The journey's end. In the days that followed, there were more challenges. The families of the dead suitors sought revenge, and another battle nearly erupted. But Athena herself intervened, commanding peace, and eventually harmony was restored to Ithaca. Odysseus had completed his journey. He had traveled farther than any hero before him, faced monsters and gods and his own limitations. He had lost everything, his ships, his men, years of his life, but he had never lost sight of home. And in the end, that determination, that unwillingness to give up even when all seemed lost, had brought him back. The story of Odysseus teaches us many things. It reminds us that the journey home is often longer and more difficult than we expect. It shows us that cleverness and persistence can overcome strength. It demonstrates that even heroes make mistakes, lose their way, suffer defeats. But what matters is continuing forward. Most of all, it tells us that home is not just a place, but the people who love us and wait for us. Through all his adventures, all the temptations to give up or to accept an easier life somewhere else, Odysseus held on to the thought of Penelope and Telemachus and rocky Ithaca. That thought sustained him through everything. And Penelope, too, showed her own kind of heroism. The patience to wait, the cleverness to hold off the suitors, the faith that Odysseus still lived and would return. Her journey was different from his, but no less difficult. Together, they teach us that love is what makes us persevere through impossible trials. Love is what brings us home, even across wine-dark seas and 20 years of wandering. Rest now. Let this ancient story be your companion as you drift now towards sleep. You made your own journeys through this day. Face your own challenges, weathered your own storms. Now it is time to rest, to let go of your struggles and your travels. Close your eyes and imagine yourself on that Phaeacian ship, sailing so smoothly that you don't even feel the motion, carried safely toward home. Feel yourself relaxing into that deep, peaceful sleep that Odysseus knew, the sleep of someone who has finally stopped struggling and surrendered to the journey. The seas are calm now. The storms are past. The gods are watching over you, gentle and kind. And home, whatever home means to you, whether a place or a person or simply a state of peace, is waiting for you just beyond the horizon of sleep. Let yourself drift. Let the story fade into dreams. Let 20 years of wandering dissolve into darkness behind your eyes. You are safe. You are at rest. Tomorrow you will wake in your own Ithaca, whatever that may be. But for now, There's only the gentle rocking of the waves, the soft blanket of night, and the long, peaceful voyage into sleep. Rest now, weary traveler. Your journey today is complete. Sleep deeply, sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with homecoming.